Have you ever wondered what happens to the money you donate to political parties? In a country as diverse and vibrant as India, politics is more than just governance. It's an integral part of the social fabric. But beneath this vibrant facade, there lurks a shadowy enigma that's as intriguing as it is controversial: the opaque nature of political funding. Let's unravel this mystery by probing into the world of electoral bonds, the financial instruments that have stirred up a storm in Indian politics in recent years. At their core, electoral bonds are like promissory notes, a way for donors, both individuals and corporations, to anonymously contribute to political parties. But why does it matter, you ask? Picture this: you're donating to a political party, but instead of handing over cash, you're purchasing an electoral bond from the State Bank of India. This bond, which can be anywhere between 1,000 to 10 million rupees, is then given to the political party of your choice. Sounds straightforward, right? But here's the catch: the identity of the donor remains anonymous. This lack of transparency raises a slew of questions and concerns. Who is funding our political parties? Could there be a conflict of interest? Is there a chance for quid pro quo? And more importantly, is the common man's interest being sidelined in favor of deep-pocketed donors? While the government argues that these bonds ensure clean money flows into the political system, critics argue the contrary. They contend that by enabling anonymous donations, these bonds have opened the floodgates for unaccounted money to seep into the political machinery, thereby potentially influencing policy decisions. As we stand on the precipice of this paradox, the importance of understanding and questioning the mechanisms of our political funding becomes evident. After all, in a democracy, shouldn't the people have a right to know who is funding their leaders? So, buckle up as we delve into the murky waters of India's political funding. It's time to shine a light on the shadows and seek the truth behind the electoral bond scam. In the year 2017, a new player entered the Indian political arena: the electoral bond. This was more than just a piece of paper. It represented a promise of change, of transparency. The brainchild of the union budget of that year, the electoral bond was a novel concept. It was a financial instrument introduced with the intention to clean up political funding in India. The electoral bond's inception was marked by the announcement made by the then finance minister in his budget speech. He described it as a tool for improving transparency and accountability in political funding. It was a move applauded by many, seen as a step towards curbing the rampant corruption and black money in politics. So how did this work? Well, an electoral bond was essentially an interest-free banking instrument, much like a promissory note. It was a bearer instrument, which meant that the entity holding the bond had the right to the money. The bonds were issued in multiples of 1,000, 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 lakhs and 1 crore rupees, ensuring a range that catered to different levels of contributors. The State Bank of India was chosen as the sole issuer of these bonds. They were sold in 10 phases across the year, each phase lasting 10 days. The sale took place in the months of January, April, July and October, with an additional period in the year of the general elections. The bond was a veiled promise, a promise of anonymity to the donor. It was designed in such a way that it left no trace of the identity of the contributor. The donor could buy these bonds and donate them to the political party of their choice. The party could then encash these bonds within 15 days of issuance. The birth of the electoral bond was greeted with hope. It was seen as a revolutionary step towards cleaning up the murky waters of political funding. However, what seemed like a step towards transparency soon started to unravel. What if the mask of transparency concealed a darker truth? Let's delve into the murkier depths of the electoral bond scam. Imagine a political funding system shrouded in secrecy, where the identity of the donor is known only to the bank and the government. This is the reality of electoral bonds in India. The anonymity of these bonds, touted as a feature to protect donors from political retribution, is ironically their biggest flaw. You see, the anonymity allows for money to change hands without anyone being the wiser. It's a perfect recipe for money laundering, where unaccounted wealth can be funneled into the political system, cleaned and then used without a trace. And it doesn't end there. The opacity extends to the government and its agencies as well. The Election Commission of India, the body that should be overseeing this process, is kept in the dark. They have no idea who is donating to whom. The lack of oversight is alarming and the potential for misuse is tremendous. In a system where transparency should be the cornerstone, this level of secrecy is disconcerting. The bonds were introduced to bring transparency and accountability into political funding. Instead, they've created an opaque system where money can flow freely without any checks or balances. The very instrument that was supposed to cleanse the political system of black money has the potential to become its biggest facilitator. It's like cleaning a stain with a dirtier cloth. The irony is palpable, and the repercussions grave. In the world's largest democracy, where the power of the people should reign supreme, the electoral bond scheme has the potential to undermine the very essence of democracy. It can allow a few wealthy individuals or corporations to wield undue influence over political parties and, by extension, over the policies that govern the nation. The bonds that were meant to clean the system were now under suspicion of dirtying it further. The question that arises then is, who is the watchdog when the watchdog itself is blind? The question that arises now is, who benefited from these bonds? Let's delve deeper into the murky waters of political financing and dissect the distribution of these electoral bonds among various political parties. It's quite a tangled web, but it's crucial to unravel if we want to truly understand the magnitude of this issue. India's political landscape is a diverse and vibrant tapestry, woven with countless parties, each with their own distinct ideologies and agendas. In such a scenario, one would imagine that the distribution of electoral bonds would be an equitable affair. But alas, the reality is far from it. In fact, the distribution of these bonds is heavily skewed, with the lion's share going to the ruling party. Now, you might wonder, why is this happening? Well, the answer lies in the very structure of the electoral bond scheme. The scheme gives donors the freedom to contribute to the party of their choice anonymously. It's a system that can be easily manipulated, and it appears that's exactly what's happened. Let's put this into perspective. Think of a business tycoon who wants a favorable government policy. By donating a hefty amount through electoral bonds to the ruling party, he can potentially influence policy decisions, all while remaining anonymous. It's a win-win situation for the donor and the ruling party, that is. But what about the other parties, the ones who don't have the reins of power in their hands? They are left scrambling for the leftover crumbs, struggling to keep their political machinery running. This uneven distribution of bonds has created a financial imbalance in the political arena, strengthening the ruling party's position and weakening the opposition. This disproportionate advantage enjoyed by the ruling party is not just a concern for the political parties themselves, it's a concern for us, the citizens, too. When a single party has a financial upper hand, it can lead to a one-sided narrative, stifling the voice of the opposition and undermining the very essence of a democratic system. Moreover, this system of anonymous donations through electoral bonds has raised serious questions about transparency and accountability in political funding. After all, when large sums of money change hands behind closed doors, it's only natural to wonder who's pulling the strings. In conclusion, the electoral bond scheme, as it currently stands, seems to be less about empowering political parties and more about consolidating power in the hands of a few. It's a classic case of the rich getting richer while the poor get poorer. But this time, it's playing out on the political stage. In the game of politics, the scales of power often tip in favor of those who hold the purse strings. In a democracy, the courts are often the last line of defense against corruption. So, what did the Supreme Court say? Let's delve into the Supreme Court's stance on the electoral bond scam. The apex court's view on this issue was not black and white, but rather a shade of gray. Although many expected the court to stay the controversial scheme, the Supreme Court decided otherwise. Instead of putting a halt to the scheme, the court demanded more transparency. The Supreme Court, in a restrained yet consequential move, didn't stay the electoral bond scheme, but rather insisted on more transparency. They called for all political parties to provide full details of their funding received through these bonds to the Election Commission in a sealed cover. This was a significant decision, attempting to balance the need for campaign finance with the essential democratic principle of transparency. The court's decision to demand transparency was rooted in an understanding that in a democracy, the source of political funding should not be a secret. The electorate has a right to know where their potential leaders are getting their funds from. This transparency, the court believed, would not only ensure accountability but also discourage illicit funding. However, the court stopped short of declaring the scheme unconstitutional or illegal. This decision left many political watchers and citizens puzzled. While the demand for transparency was a positive step, the court's reluctance to stay the scheme raised eyebrows. Critics argued that this decision allowed the continuation of a scheme that is fundamentally flawed and potentially damaging to the democratic process. The Supreme Court's stance on the Electoral Bond Scam, therefore, is a mixed bag. On one hand, it upheld the importance of transparency in political funding. On the other hand, it did not take definitive action against a scheme that many believe undermines the very fabric of democracy. The court's decision, though significant, left many questions unanswered. And as we move forward, these questions will undoubtedly continue to shape the conversation around electoral funding in India. In the wake of the revelations, where does India's political funding stand, you may ask? The aftermath of the Electoral Bond Scam has left ripples across the political landscape of India. The nation's faith in the sanctity of political funding has been shaken, and calls for reform have grown louder. Following the scam, there have been notable changes to the electoral bond scheme. The government, pressed by public outcry, has been working on revisions, seeking to improve transparency and accountability. However, many argue that these revisions are a mere drop in the ocean, and a more comprehensive overhaul of the system is necessary to root out corruption. As we look back, we find a tale of corruption and deceit that unfolded in the heart of India's political system. The birth of the bond, initially hailed as a revolutionary step towards clean politics, soon became a tool for money laundering. The unveiling of the scam painted a grim picture of the extent of corruption. With major political parties implicated, the party-wise breakdown revealed a stark disparity, with the ruling party receiving the lion's share of the funds. This imbalance raised questions about the fairness of the electoral process, leading to widespread public concern. The Supreme Court's stand on the matter, though cautious, underscored the need for greater transparency. The court's intervention was a ray of hope in the murky waters of political funding, but the journey towards a clean and fair system is far from over. In summary, the electoral bond scam in India has exposed the dark underbelly of political funding. It has shown us how a seemingly noble cause can be manipulated for personal gain, and how the lack of transparency can breed corruption. The story of the electoral bond scam serves as a stark reminder of the need for transparency in political funding. As we move forward, it's crucial that we learn from this episode and work towards a system that upholds the principles of fairness, integrity, and transparency. Only then can we hope for a future where political funding truly serves the democratic process. The question remains, how can we ensure a clean and transparent political system? As we delve deeper into the labyrinth of the electoral bond scam in India, we find ourselves standing at the crossroads of democracy and corruption. The implications of this scam have far-reaching effects that threaten to undermine the very foundations of our democratic system. In a democracy, the power of the people is paramount, and when that power is compromised, the essence of democracy is lost. This incident isn't just about a singular scam. It is a stark reminder of the potential pitfalls in our political system. It is a wake-up call that highlights the importance of transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. Without these pillars, the edifice of our democracy is at risk of crumbling. The electoral bond scam is a glaring example of how the opaque nature of political funding can lead to misuse of power, corruption, and a loss of faith in the system. It underlines the urgent need to scrutinize, question, and reform our political funding mechanisms. So how do we navigate this complex terrain? The answer lies in us, the citizens of this democracy. We must remain vigilant, informed, and proactive. Our responsibility doesn't end at the ballot box. It extends to holding our leaders accountable for their actions, demanding transparency in their dealings, and insisting on reforms when necessary. The journey towards a clean and transparent political system is long and arduous. It requires a collective effort from each one of us. We must stay informed, question the status quo, and demand accountability from our leaders. In the end, the strength of a democracy is determined not by its leaders but by its citizens. It is our responsibility to ensure that our democracy remains vibrant, resilient, and true to its principles. The power to shape a transparent political future lies in the hands of the informed citizen. Stay vigilant, stay informed.